In 2005, the morning sun cast long shadows across the suburban streets of Anaheim, California. Marcus Chen had built secure vision technologies from nothing just 2 years earlier, riding the wave of new security camera technology that was revolutionizing how businesses protected themselves. His small team of technicians moved through the city like digital pioneers, installing eyes that never slept on buildings that had been blind for decades. Tommy Rodriguez was the heart of that team. At 34, he carried himself with the careful precision of someone who understood that electricity demanded respect. His weathered hands, scarred from years of wire work, could thread cables through the tightest spaces and diagnose problems that left other technicians scratching their heads. But those same hands trembled slightly when he thought about the stack of bills waiting at home. The anxiety lived in his chest like a constant weight. Tommy had developed a relationship with food that went beyond hunger. It was comfort, distraction, a momentary escape from the numbers that never seemed to add up. His wife Maria would find empty containers hidden in his truck, evidence of late-night stops at drive-thrus when the pressure became too much to bear. "You're gonna work yourself into the ground, hermano," his best friend and co-worker Jake Morrison would say, watching Tommy wolf down his third breakfast burrito before their first job of the day. Jake had been with Secure Vision since the beginning, and he'd watched Tommy's stress eating intensify as their workload increased. Marcus knew about Tommy's financial struggles. The company was growing fast, but cash flow was always tight in those early days. He'd seen Tommy's face when payday was delayed by a week, the way his shoulders sagged when he thought no one was looking. But Tommy never complained. He just worked harder, took on extra shifts, and smiled that genuine smile that made clients trust him instantly. On October 15, 2005, Tommy was scheduled to install a new camera system at a downtown office building. It was a big job, 12 cameras, complete wiring overhaul, the kind of contract that could keep Secure Vision afloat for another month. Tommy had been excited about it, talking Jake's ear off about the technical challenges and the overtime pay. But Tommy never showed up to the job site. Marcus got the call at 9:30 a.m. from the building manager, irritated and demanding to know where his technician was. Marcus tried Tommy's cell phone, straight to voicemail. He drove to Tommy's apartment, knocked until his knuckles were raw. Maria answered, her face already creased with worry. "He left for work at 6:30, just like always," she said, wrapping her robe tighter around herself. "Said he'd be home late because of the big installation." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. Tommy was many things, anxious, struggling, sometimes overwhelmed, but he was never unreliable. In 2 years, he'd never missed a job without calling. The police took a missing person report, but their interest was lukewarm. Adult men disappeared sometimes, they said. Financial problems, family stress, maybe he just needed some space. They'd keep an eye out, but these things usually resolved themselves. Days turned into weeks. Marcus hired a private investigator, put up flyers, offered a reward. Tommy's truck was found 3 days later in a parking lot near the beach, keys still in the ignition, his tool belt neatly arranged in the back. But Tommy himself had vanished as completely as if he'd never existed. The last image of him was captured on a gas station security camera at 6:45 a.m., buying coffee and a breakfast sandwich, looking tired, but normal. After that, nothing. The investigation consumed Marcus like a fever. He plastered Tommy's photo on every telephone pole in Anaheim, paid for ads in Spanish-language newspapers, and drove the same routes Tommy might have taken until he could navigate them blindfolded. Every lead dissolved into nothing. A homeless man who might have seen someone matching Tommy's description, a convenience store clerk who thought maybe he'd sold cigarettes to someone who looked familiar. Jake took Tommy's disappearance the hardest. They'd started at Secure Vision on the same day, bonding over shared stories of difficult childhoods and dreams of stable futures. Jake would sit in his truck during lunch breaks, staring at Tommy's empty passenger seat where his friend used to unwrap his anxiety-driven feast of fast food while complaining about bills and praising his wife's cooking in the same breath. He wouldn't just leave, Jake told Marcus for the 100th time, his voice hoarse from another sleepless night. Tommy had problems, sure, but he loved Maria. He was working towards something, saving up for a house, talking about kids. Maria aged years in those first few months. The woman who used to greet Marcus with warm smiles and offers of homemade tamales became a ghost, haunting her own apartment. She kept Tommy's work clothes laid out on the bed for weeks, as if he might walk through the door and need them for tomorrow's job. The bills he'd been so anxious about piled up unopened on the kitchen table, cruel reminders of problems that no longer mattered. The private investigator, a weathered ex-cop named Detective Ray Sullivan, worked the case with methodical determination. He interviewed every client Tommy had serviced, tracked down every person who'd been in contact with him in the weeks before his disappearance. The picture that emerged was of a man under pressure but not desperate enough to abandon everything. Financial stress doesn't usually make family men vanish, Sullivan told Marcus during one of their monthly meetings. There's something else here. Maybe he saw something he shouldn't have, or someone was pressuring him about those debts. But even Sullivan's expertise hit dead ends. Tommy's bank account showed no unusual activity. His credit cards hadn't been used. There were no secret gambling debts, no loan sharks, no hidden addictions beyond his relationship with food. He was exactly what he appeared to be. A good man struggling with ordinary problems. Secure Vision struggled too. Marcus found himself unable to focus on growing the business when one of his own had simply evaporated. He turned down contracts, spent company money on the search, and watched his dream slowly crumble under the weight of unanswered questions. Years passed like a slow-motion nightmare. Tommy's birthday came and went. Maria would buy a cake and sit alone at their kitchen table, crying into frosting that no one would eat. Christmas mornings felt hollow. With presents Maria had bought out of habit sitting unopened under a tree that seemed to mock the absence. Jake eventually left Secure Vision, unable to work in a place haunted by his missing friend. He'd call Marcus every few months, always asking the same question. Anything new on Tommy? The answer was always the same devastating silence. By 2010, even Detective Sullivan had moved on to other cases. The file remained open, but hope had withered like flowers left too long without water. Marcus kept the business running, but something essential had been broken that October morning when Tommy failed to show up for work. Maria remarried in 2012, a kind man who understood that part of her heart would always belong to someone who might never come home. She kept Tommy's wedding ring in a small box on her dresser, next to a photo of them at a company barbecue, both laughing at something Jake had said. The city of Anaheim grew and changed around Tommy's absence. New buildings rose where he might have installed cameras. Technology evolved beyond what he'd known, and life moved forward with the relentless indifference of time. But Marcus never stopped wondering. 12 years had transformed Secure Vision Technologies into something Marcus barely recognized. What started as a two-man operation in 2003 had evolved into a regional security powerhouse with 40 employees and contracts spanning 3 counties. The company occupied a modern building in downtown Anaheim, complete with a state-of-the-art training facility and a warehouse that hummed with the latest surveillance technology. But success felt hollow when measured against the ghost that still haunted Marcus's memory. In March 2017, Secure Vision landed a massive contract to upgrade the security system at Anaheim General Hospital. The project required running new fiber optic cables through the building's basement, a labyrinthine network of tunnels and utility corridors that had been largely untouched since the hospital's construction in the 1980s. Jake Morrison had returned to Secure Vision 2 years earlier, drawn back by competitive pay and the promise of working on cutting-edge projects. Time had softened the sharp edges of his grief, but Tommy's absence remained a constant ache. He'd learned to live with unanswered questions the way others lived with chronic pain. Manageable most days, unbearable on others. The hospital basement was a maze of concrete corridors lined with pipes, electrical conduits, and decades of accumulated dust. Jake worked alongside 2 newer technicians, Miguel Santos and David Park, threading cables through spaces that seemed designed to frustrate anyone larger than a child. "This place gives me the creeps," Miguel muttered, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Feels like a tomb down here." Jake was focused on a particularly stubborn section of conduit when his drill bit hit something that wasn't concrete. The resistance felt wrong, too soft, too yielding. He pulled back and examined the small hole he'd created, frowning at the dark space beyond. "David, bring that flashlight over here," he called. The beam revealed a hollow space behind the wall, maybe 18 inches deep. Jake enlarged the hole carefully, his electrician's instincts telling him to proceed with caution around unknown voids. As chunks of concrete fell away, something glinted in the flashlight beam. "What the hell?" David whispered. Jake's hands trembled as he reached into the space and pulled out a cell phone, an old flip phone, the kind that had been cutting-edge technology in 2005. The plastic casing was cracked and discolored, But the device was unmistakably intact, preserved in the dry space behind the wall like an artifact from another era. Miguel leaned closer, squinting at the phone. "Dude, that thing's ancient. Who still uses flip phones?" But Jake wasn't listening. His fingers traced the familiar scratches on the phone's surface. Scratches he remembered watching Tommy make with his keys during nervous moments. A small sticker on the back, faded but still visible, showed a cartoon electrician with the words, "Wire Guy," underneath. Jake had given Tommy that sticker as a joke during their first week at Secure Vision. The basement suddenly felt airless. Jake's vision tunneled, and he had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. 12 years of wondering, 12 years of sleepless nights and unanswered questions, and here was Tommy's phone, hidden behind a wall in a place Tommy had never worked. "Jake? You okay, man?" David's voice seemed to come from very far away. "I need to call Marcus," Jake managed, his voice barely a whisper. "Right now." Marcus arrived at the hospital within 20 minutes, his face pale and drawn. He'd been in a board meeting when Jake called, but something in his friend's voice had made him drop everything and drive across town with his heart hammering against his ribs. The 3 technicians led him down into the basement, through the maze of corridors to the small hole in the wall. Marcus stared at the phone in Jake's hands, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "Are you sure?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. He'd seen Tommy fidget with that phone 1,000 times, watched him peel and replace that same sticker when the edges started to curl. Jake nodded, unable to speak. Marcus took the phone with hands that shook like leaves in a storm. After 12 years of searching, of hiring investigators and following false leads, Tommy's phone had been waiting here all along, sealed behind concrete and silence. But if the phone was here, in a place Tommy had never been, what did that mean about everything else they thought they knew? The phone sat on Marcus's desk like an accusation, its cracked screen reflecting the fluorescent lights of his office. Detective Sullivan, now retired but still sharp-eyed, had agreed to meet them at Secure Vision headquarters. The years had added gray to his temples and lines around his eyes, but his interest in Tommy's case remained as intense as ever. "The battery's completely dead, obviously," Sullivan said, turning the device over in his gloved hands. "But the SIM card might still be readable. We'll need to get this to the lab, see what we can recover." Jake sat slumped in a chair, staring at his hands. "How did it get there, Ray? That wall looked original, like it hadn't been touched since the hospital was built." "That's what we need to figure out," Sullivan replied. "The construction records show that section of the basement was completed in 1987. If Tommy's phone is behind that wall..." He didn't finish the sentence. They all understood the implications. Marcus felt something breaking inside his chest, a careful structure of hope and denial that had held him together for 12 years. Someone put it there. Someone who knew we'd eventually find it. The lab results came back 3 days later. The phone's memory had yielded fragments, partial text messages, call logs, pieces of a digital life frozen in time. Most of it was routine, messages to Maria about dinner plans, work-related calls, the mundane communications of an ordinary life. But buried in the recovered data was something that made Sullivan's blood run cold. A text message, sent at 6:52 a.m. on October 15, 2005, 7 minutes after the gas station security camera had captured Tommy's last known image. The message was to a number that no longer existed, and it contained only 4 words. "I can't do this." "Can't do what?" Jake asked, his voice hollow. Sullivan spread the lab report across Marcus's desk. "There's more. Bank records we couldn't access 12 years ago. They've been digitized now, easier to search. Tommy had been making cash deposits, small amounts, but regular. Always the day after Secure Vision got paid." Marcus felt the room spinning. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Tommy Rodriguez wasn't just struggling with bills, he was skimming money from your company, probably to pay off debts you never knew about. And on October 15, 2005, something made him realize he couldn't keep doing it." The revelation hit Jake like a physical blow. His best friend, the man he'd defended for 12 years, had been stealing from the company that had tried to help him. No, Tommy wouldn't. He was a good man. "Good men do desperate things when they're cornered," Sullivan said gently. "The question is, what happened after he sent that text?" Marcus stood and walked to the window, staring out at the Anaheim streets where Tommy had once worked. The betrayal felt like a knife between his ribs, but underneath the pain was something else, a terrible understanding. "He was going to confess," Marcus said quietly. "That morning, He was supposed to do the hospital job. Big contract, lots of money. Maybe he realized he couldn't steal from that too. So he ran. Jake's voice was bitter. Or someone made sure he couldn't confess, Sullivan said. The investigation that followed was different from the one 12 years earlier. This time they had a direction, a thread to pull. Sullivan worked his old contacts, traced the mysterious phone number, followed paper trails that had been invisible in 2005. What they found was a network of small-time loan sharks who specialized in targeting working-class men with gambling problems. Tommy had borrowed money to cover his family's medical bills when Maria had been hospitalized the year before his disappearance. The interest had compounded, the payments had become impossible, and Tommy had started taking small amounts from Secure Vision's petty cash to stay afloat. But the loan sharks wanted more than money. They wanted Tommy to use his access to security systems, to provide information about when buildings would be vulnerable. When Tommy finally refused, when he decided to confess everything to Marcus instead of becoming a criminal, they had made him disappear. The phone in the wall wasn't evidence of Tommy's location. It was a message, a reminder that they could reach anyone, anywhere, anytime. Marcus sat in his office long after Sullivan and Jake had left, holding the phone that had started everything. 12 years of wondering, and the truth was somehow worse than not knowing. Tommy had been a thief, but he'd also been a victim. He'd been trying to do the right thing when it cost him everything. The next morning, Marcus drove to the cemetery where Maria's second husband was buried. She was there, as he'd hoped, tending to flowers that grew in neat rows. She looked older, grayer, but there was a peace in her face that hadn't been there during those terrible months after Tommy's disappearance. "Maria," he said softly. She turned, and her face went pale when she saw what he was holding. Maria's hands trembled as she reached for Tommy's phone, her fingers tracing the familiar scratches and that faded wire guy sticker. 12 years of carefully constructed peace crumbled in an instant, replaced by the raw grief she'd learned to bury. "Where?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the cemetery's rustling trees. Marcus told her everything. The discovery in the hospital basement, the recovered messages, the loan sharks, the impossible choice Tommy had faced between his family's safety and his own integrity. Maria listened in silence, tears streaming down her cheeks as the man she'd mourned transformed from victim to something more complicated. "He was trying to protect us," she said finally. "The medical bills from my surgery, we never talked about how much they really cost. Tommy just said he'd handle it. He was going to confess, Maria. That morning he was going to tell me everything and face the consequences. That took courage." Maria clutched the phone to her chest. "But they didn't let him, did they?" Marcus shook his head. The investigation had revealed the loan sharks network, but the men who had silenced Tommy were long gone. Some imprisoned for other crimes, others disappeared into the shadows they'd emerged from. Justice, when it came, was incomplete and cold. Detective Sullivan had managed to trace the construction crew that had worked on the hospital basement in late 2005. One worker, dying of cancer in a Nevada prison, had finally confessed to stealing Tommy's phone behind that wall. He'd been paid $500 to hide it there, told it was part of an insurance scam. He'd never known about the murder, never understood that he was helping to bury evidence of a life stolen. The phone had been placed there as a message to anyone else who might consider crossing the loan sharks, a reminder that they could reach into the past and make people disappear. But time had eroded their power, and the message had become evidence instead. Jake struggled with the revelation more than anyone. His best friend had been a thief, but also a man trying to climb out of a hole that kept getting deeper. The Tommy he'd known, anxious, food-obsessed, but fundamentally decent, had been real. The stealing had been desperation, not greed. "I keep thinking about all those lunches," Jake told Marcus one evening as they worked late in the office. Tommy eating like he was starving, but it wasn't about hunger. It was about the weight he was carrying, all those secrets. Marcus had made his own peace with the truth. Secure Vision had grown beyond what he'd ever imagined, but success felt different now. He'd established a fund for employees facing financial emergencies, a way to help without judgment or shame. Tommy's name was on a small plaque in the break room, not as a memorial to the dead, but as a reminder that good people sometimes made bad choices when they felt trapped. The phone itself became evidence in a federal investigation into loan sharking operations across Southern California. Tommy's case helped prosecutors connect dots they'd been trying to connect for years, leading to indictments and convictions that might have saved other families from similar tragedies. But for Marcus, the real closure came 6 months later, when Maria called him with news that changed everything. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice filled with wonder and fear. "David and we didn't think it would happen. I'm 43, Marcus, but the doctors say everything looks good." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of grief he'd carried for so long it had become part of him. "Tommy would be happy for you, Maria. He'd want you to have this." "I know," she said. "And Marcus? I want to name the baby Thomas, not after my first husband, but after the man who tried to do the right thing when it mattered most." The baby was born on a crisp October morning, exactly 13 years after Tommy Rodriguez had sent his last text message. Maria held her son in the same hospital where his namesake's phone had been discovered, and for the first time in over a decade, the anniversary of Tommy's disappearance felt like a beginning instead of an ending. Marcus visited them in the hospital, bringing flowers and a small gift, a children's book about electricity and how it lights up the world. As he watched Maria cradle her son, he thought about the strange mathematics of loss and recovery, how sometimes the worst truths could lead to unexpected grace. Tommy Rodriguez had vanished on October 15, 2005, taking with him secrets that had poisoned 12 years of wondering. But his phone, hidden behind concrete and silence, had finally spoken the truth that set everyone free. The baby opened his eyes and looked directly at Marcus, as if he understood that some stories end not with answers, but with the courage to begin again.